By not addressing what's contemporary in a subject, by not emphasizing it, it becomes more accessible to us. It's a curious phenomenon. If we took the Battle of Gettysburg and tried to hit every point that connected us with our contemporary world, and there are many, it would appear as propaganda, as didactic, and ultimately boring and able to be dismissed. I could do the same thing in Joan of Arc. If I went out of my way to say, now do you understand this is a girl who's dressing as a man, who's leading armies, and why don't we have women in the military today? It would be didactic, propaganda, boring, and you could dismiss it. And it would be deserved to be dismissed, because it would be reducing her, this historical figure, to a tool to what my little political agenda is in 1995. It would be a pitiful and regrettable exercise and a waste of time and everybody's money. She's bigger than that. That's why she's compelling across the generations. Gettysburg is bigger than any little issue we want to take out of it. And by just letting those people speak for themselves to the extent possible, all the contemporary analogies become so evident that a blind man could see it. It's curious how it has this opposite effect. You just take yourself out of it, take your politics out of it to the extent possible, open yourself up to let them tell their story, and then all the contemporary relevances come home, and not only the ones that exist on the superficial political layer, but the deeper ones, the psychological ones, the real connections to these people. So that by the end of the film, I think it's fair to say, Joshua Chamberlain is now a part of your life forevermore. He will never leave you after seeing that film.
More American bloodshed in the American Civil War than all other wars combined, from the American Revolution through Vietnam. It was a catastrophe of monumental proportions. What happens that we citizens, let's not even say those politicians, we citizens, what happens to our sense of responsibility that we allow this to happen? Things get so out of control that it comes to this. And I think as a filmmaker, you can't answer these kind of enormous questions in a film. I don't believe I can, or a film can. Other filmmakers are into answering questions, and we need all kind of filmmakers. I believe my role as a filmmaker is to pose questions. And we ask these questions in 90 minutes or 180 minutes. We ask them through the emotional language of film, and then as citizens we can start to debate and maybe come up with some answers. But the questions need to be asked, and The Killer Angels is one very big, compelling question about how the very best and the very brightest and the very finest among us can get caught up in such tragedy, such monumental, horrific tragedy. Also because the issues of the Civil War were never really decided. And we have a feeling that before the Civil War there were a collection of sovereign states, and after the Civil War the country was finally born in this crucible of death, and the country kind of began with the termination of the Civil War. And all these same issues, basically, of states' rights and live and let live and rugged individualism versus this kind of federalism and government care and government being involved in things. These issues, we're fighting them out in every presidential campaign, in every by-election, in every congressional campaign, and also this dualism in the American character is vividly portrayed in the American Civil War. Joshua Chamberlain represents this crusading zealot that has to right every wrong. In the case of the Civil War, it's the abolition of slavery, but you could say it's the same thing that takes us to the beaches of Normandy in the face of fascism. It's the same thing that takes us to Vietnam and the rice paddies in the face of communism, those kind of despotisms. The same thing that takes us to Iraq. I mean, we can say, well, okay, we might have some interest in oil, protecting the oil flow, but at the same time, to be fair, a lot of the sentiment that motivated us to go to Iraq was this despot that was oppressing his own people and threatening his neighbors. And there's something in the American character that says, you know, we can't let that stand. We must stand up against the bully. This is what takes Joshua Chamberlain down to fight at Gettysburg. And on the other side, part of all of us again, is this side that identifies with Robert E. Lee and Longstreet and Armistead and Pickett, which is, hey, I mind my own business, you mind yours. I don't want anybody, a king or a tyrant or a president or a politician, to tell me how to live my life. And that also is a very strong strain in the American character. And we live with these issues today. So all these issues that were fought on the battlefields of Gettysburg and Antietam and Shiloh, in a large sense, are still with us and are still very much in our concerns.
So that in the case of Gettysburg, in order for me to be true to them, it takes a kind of a surrender. What do I mean by that? I mean a surrender of the ego, a surrender even of intentionality, surrender of preconceptions, notions, everything I may, all the baggage that I may carry around about the Civil War. I make an attempt to wipe the slate clean and start anew, to listen. To me, it's a listening process. Listening to the voices that come to us, in the case of Gettysburg, from the mid-19th century America, in the case of Joan of Arc, from the early 15th century France. To listen, to me, is a prerequisite to everything. It's before I speak, it's before I write, it's before I direct, it's listening. I think it's incumbent upon me, as someone who's interested in making historical film, to begin in this place. You have to get very quiet to listen to people who were talking 500 years ago, even 150 years ago, because there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of noise in our contemporary world. There's a lot of noise and misinformation between their world and ours. So the film is, if a film is not thought of as a connection across the generations, if a film is not thought of as a unifying force across generations, if a film is not thought of as a deeply soulful experience, akin to going to church, akin to sitting in a concert hall listening to a Brahms symphony, you're going to end up with a different product at the end of the day. Everything you do is informed differently.
And he had become Armistead by that point, to put that hat on the sword and lead those men and say, Virginians, follow me, who will follow me, and to lead them in the final space of death and destruction into the angle and go over the wall. And it was very, very, very emotional to see the flags of the Confederacy go up there and one by one fall. And then when we were done filming it, all the reenactors spontaneously and without a cue knelt, and Brian Pohanka, our historical advisor, said, let's just have a moment of silence for the brave men who fell at Gettysburg. I tell you, there was not a dry eye anywhere around the vicinity.
The fact that most movies, overwhelming number of movies, shall I say 99.99%, are between an hour and a half and 2 hours, does not mean that there's something in human nature, intrinsically in our being as humans, that that's how long a story has to take to tell. In fact, it's got nothing to do with us as human beings. I think nothing to do with us. I think this is a product of marketing, of distribution, and of economics. This is an intrusion of economic considerations into an area which should be soulful and have nothing to do with such notions as how long something is. How long is a symphony? How long is a concerto? How long is a string quartet? How long do you stand in front of things that are not determined by time, like a painting? Do you stand in front of it 30 seconds? Do you stand in front of it 2 hours? How long should you take to read a book? In the case of things which have a time element built into them, like a piece of music or a film, this time element, how long it takes to tell the story, to my mind, should be intrinsically an evolutionary process of what the story is that you're telling. At some point, it just feels right as an artist, just like the artist knows whether the canvas should be this big or a miniature. It feels right to the artist, and by some kind of alchemy, it ends up feeling right to the viewer, or not right to the viewer. The fact that there are X amount of seats and X amount of theaters across the country, and exhibitors want to show a movie X amount of times a day to get people in and out between meals or between shopping, we have to admit has nothing to do with this soulful experience of bringing a story forth the same way that the first storyteller sitting around the fire told his story to the other cave dwellers sitting around the fire. There wasn't somebody there saying, The story can just be so long because we're going to sit on these rocks until the fire goes out, and then the next group's going to come in, sit around the fire, and then the next group's going to... It didn't enter into the equation. A story has a life of its own. I think what's amazing about Gettysburg is not that it's 4.5 hours long, but that considering the subject matter, it's 4.5 hours short.
It came home to me, again, very vividly, very powerfully. This isn't my project. This is our project, and I mean our meaning, you know, in the sense of being a citizen, or it belongs to the country. And I'm very lucky that I've had a part to play in it. But I've always felt like a sense of, to play my role as someone who has to help bring it together. But everyone involved in this has owned it. Every member of the crew, every cast member, all the people at Turner Organization. And I'm just delighted that the story is being told. And I think that it'll be a healing experience to see this film. It should be. I think that through all the death and destruction and murder and mayhem and the tragedy of it all, there will be a catharsis, again coming back to the Greeks. And it'll be very healing to relive what our ancestors lived through, and to feel it as a part of who we are as a people.